You know, in the history of science, you've got your celebrated heroes and you've got your dismissed failures. But what about the guys who are both? Today, we're diving into the fascinating paradox of Franz Joseph Gall, a man who was absolutely, brilliantly right for all the wrong reasons.
So let's just start with this question right here. What if a theory that's been completely debunked, a total scientific dead end, what if that theory was also hiding the seed of an idea that would change everything we know about the human brain? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is a huge, surprising yes.
And this whole crazy contradiction, it all revolves around one guy, Franz Joseph Gall. His story is just the perfect example of how science doesn't always march forward in a nice, straight line. Nope. Sometimes the biggest leaps forward actually come from the biggest blunders.
And here it is, the core conflict of his entire legacy. On one side, he's known as the founder of Phrenology, that pseudoscience of reading bumps on your skull to figure out your personality. Total quackery. But on the other side, he's praised as a pioneer of neuroscience. So how can one person be both a charlatan and a visionary?
To figure that out, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. See, his entire life's work didn't kick off in some fancy lab. It started in a classroom with something he just noticed.
So even as a kid, Gall was a people watcher. He was totally fascinated by why his friends and classmates were so different. Why was one kid great at art and another amazing with numbers? He was always looking for these little connections between how people looked and what they were good at.
And pretty soon, he started to spot a pattern. He saw that the students in his class who were just incredible at memorizing stuff, I'm talking long passages of text, the kids with those almost photographic memories, they all seemed to share this one really distinct physical trait, prominent, kind of bulging eyes. Now, for most of us, we just think, that's weird, and move on. But for Gall, this was a major clue.
And this was the big leap. Gall decided this couldn't just be a coincidence. He had this idea. What if a super-developed memory region of the brain was physically getting bigger and literally pushing the front of the brain and the eyes forward? This one little observation planted the seed for everything that followed, the idea that the brain isn't just one mushy organ, but a bunch of different parts.
So, how in the world does a weird observation about his classmates' eyes turn into this whole complicated system? Well, Gall spent decades building on this one core idea, creating this elaborate method for basically mapping the mind based on the bumps on your head.
He called his theory organology, and at its heart was a really revolutionary idea for the time. The mind isn't just one single thing. He said it was actually a collection of separate functions, or organs, and each one had its own little home in a different part of the brain.
Okay, this slide breaks down the simple, step-by-step logic that made his theory, which later got renamed Phrenology, so convincing to so many people. It goes like this. 1. The brain is made of different organs. Okay, makes sense. 2. If you use an organ a lot, it gets bigger, kind of like a muscle, right? 3. The skull hardens over the brain as you grow, so it takes on the brain's shape. And the logical conclusion, step 4, the bumps on your skull are a direct map to your personality and your talents. You can see why people thought, hey, that makes sense.
Now, Gall didn't just leave it as a general concept. Oh no, he got incredibly specific. He claimed that he had pinpointed the exact locations of 27 different mental faculties. And these faculties were wild. They weren't just general things like intelligence. He claimed he found the exact spots in the brain for everything from mechanical ability and a talent for poetry to some really out there ones like a love of property and even a murder instinct.
As you can probably guess, these ideas did not sit well with, pretty much anyone in charge. Gall very quickly found himself in the middle of a massive firestorm, getting attacked from every direction.
Yeah, he was basically fighting a war on two fronts. You had the state and the church accusing him of materialism, this super dangerous idea that your mind and your soul could be reduced to just a physical piece of tissue. Then you're the scientific community just shaking their heads saying, look, you have no real proof, this is all just stories and anecdotes.
And this pushback was serious. In the early 1800s, the Austrian government completely banned his lectures. A bit later in France, Napoleon Bonaparte himself and the super prestigious Institute of France basically declared his science to be garbage. And all this time, other scientists like Jean-Pierre Flourens were doing experiments that seemed to totally contradict his claims. So his system's under attack, his lectures are banned, his methods are being disproven. By all accounts, this thing should be a total failure. But here's the twist. Buried deep inside that spectacular failure was the seed of his true and totally accidental legacy.
Let's just be 100% clear on this. The main practice of phrenology, feeling the bumps on someone's head to figure out their character, is pseudoscience. It has been proven wrong again and again. It does not work.
But remember that very first step in his logic from a few slides ago? The one that said the brain is made of different parts that do different things? That idea, the very foundation his entire mistaken theory was built on, that turned out to be revolutionary.
And right here, this is where the whole paradox gets solved. The mistake was the method, phrenology. That part was total nonsense. But the breakthrough was the principle hidden underneath it all, functional localization. The radical idea that different parts of the brain do different jobs. That single concept is the bedrock of all of modern neuroscience.
So what's the big lesson here? Well, Gall's story is just a powerful reminder that scientific progress is messy. It isn't a straight line. By asking the right question, do different brain parts have different jobs? He put science on the right track, even though his own answer was dead wrong. Without Gall's big mistake, who knows how long it would have taken to get to the modern brain mapping tools, like MRIs, that we depend on today.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to chew on. If one of science's biggest mistakes was also one of its most important steps forward, it really makes you wonder, how many of our own deeply held beliefs today are maybe just flawed, but totally necessary, stepping stones for the big breakthroughs of tomorrow?